This is the Philanthropy Show, connecting and inspiring philanthropy. Here's your host, Luann Walters.
Welcome to the Philanthropy Show. I am your host, Luann Saraga Walters. One of the goals that we have with this show is that once a month we want to have a spotlight on a certain issue. And we thought that we would start at the beginning of the alphabet. Of course, that's an easy way to choose, but it's also because Sharon and I have a dear friend who she and her son and daughter are very close to us. And her son, Michael, was diagnosed with autism when he was 3. We're also going to have an expert on from the Center for Autism and Related Disabilities. And this show is really for those of you in the nonprofit world working with autism, board members, donors, who may have experience with this, so that we can get an in-person look and a very personal look at what goes on with this with families, and maybe find some solutions, maybe connect you to community resources. So I'd like to introduce now Linda Thyrre and Michael Thyrre. Welcome you both to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Welcome.
What do you think, Michael, of this green screen?
It's good to learn.
It's wild, isn't it?
It sure is.
Have you ever sat in a green screen set like this?
That's my first time.
Okay, there's a first time for everything. Well, Linda, I want to dive right into your background, and thank you so much for coming on the show. You are probably one of the strongest women I've ever met, and knowing your story, and thank you for sharing that with us, and for stepping forward, and Michael, you too, for coming on to talk with really the nation, because this is an internet talk show. So tell me a little bit about the history. You have an older daughter, Melissa.
I do.
Yes, you do. You have an older sister, Melissa. And so, Linda, tell me the story. How did you find out about Michael's autism?
Well, Michael was about 2.5 years old, and he was in a little preschool that he was having behavioral problems. And we were called in by the school to let us know that either he was having hearing problems or he didn't understand what they were saying to him. Mm-hmm. So the whole thing started with Michael getting his hearing checked. And from there, we went through probably about 6 months worth of testing. This was down in Miami. That's where we're from. And at the end of the thing that was interesting was that all of his tests came out normal. There wasn't anything that showed anything abnormal. So finally,
and this was 23.
He's 23 years ago.
23 years ago.
Yeah, 23 years ago. So finally, he was. We ended up with a neurologist. And he did a physical examination of Michael and was watching Michael and his behavior and how he interacted with him and whatnot, and interviewed my ex-husband and I, and was determined that, I'll never forget what he said. He said, I can't tell you in black and white what I'm about to share with you, but it is my feeling that Michael is in the autism spectrum disorder, and the best thing that you can do for him is early intervention and parental education. And at that time, I had no idea what autism was. I hadn't been touched by it any way in my life.
I don't think there was much awareness even. I don't think people had really even heard the word very often.
No, there was no Google. Mm-hmm. There was no search engines. He gave me a stack this big of different magazines, periodicals, and whatnot, and told me to join support groups, and I pretty much took about 2 weeks, read all that stuff, cried a lot, kind of mourned the death of the child that I thought that I had, and then kind of went from there and just started looking for therapies for him.
What did you find right away? Because, I mean, it's obviously folks are thinking of Michael at 3 and diagnosed, and here's this wonderful young man who you're just such a delight, and everybody who knows you loves you. And, here he is, 26 years old. So what were you thinking back then of where do I go? What do I do?
Well, in a way, because I really didn't know what autism was, I didn't realize that it was something that is not curable, in my opinion. At the time, I thought it was. So my thinking was, well, I'm going to make my son normal. I'm going to do whatever it takes, whatever that takes, as long as it doesn't hurt him physically, emotionally, or mentally. If it's a controversial new therapy or whatever, I'm going to try it, because with these guys, different things work for different people. Mm-hmm. So over the years, I just kept trying things and kept trying things and kept trying things, and I didn't give up. And ultimately, when he was diagnosed, he was nonverbal. Mm-hmm. And I was told at that time he was probably going to continue to be nonverbal. He was not going to acquire language.
Well, he proved them wrong.
Certainly did. He certainly did.
Michael, so thanks for coming on the show.
You're welcome.
And I wanted to ask you, you're 26.
Yes.
You drive.
I do drive a lot.
You do, and you have a job.
Yes, I work 2 jobs, Tropicana Field and at the Flying Pig Tap House.
And which one, do you have a preference? I think you like both of them, don't you?
Yeah, I do like both of them, but the thing is that trying to get myself into a job at the school system, because Tom I've been working with for years, trying to get me set up.
And set up how?
Trying to get me a job into the school system.
Well, that's awesome. What do you want to do in the school system?
They'll tell me which job's available.
Well, that's fantastic, Michael. Good for you. I want to ask you, do you remember when your mom first told you that you had been diagnosed with autism?
I don't remember.
You don't? But what does it mean to you now?
It means they checked.
Yeah. And does that make you feel different, or does it make you aware of certain behaviors?
I feel different.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you explain that?
Makes me feel different. They have to be aware of certain behaviors of how I interact with other people.
But you're also aware of those behaviors. You do such a good job with that. And I know that you remember that young boy, Jack, and you help him? How do you help a younger boy who's been diagnosed?
Being calm and patient, I'm like, Jack, don't do this, don't do that. No, don't. I don't have to tell your mom that you're not listening. Slow it down.
Well, that's good. You're a mentor then.
I was very patient with him.
You are. And he's kudos to you, because, Michael, your mom is an amazing woman, isn't she?
She sure is.
Yeah. Tell me, what were some of the things that you had to put into place, Linda, when you were working with Michael and growing up?
Well, we started with speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy. I had a program developed in my home, which is probably what they would consider ABA therapy now. Dr. Philip Drash, Michael was going to him for speech therapy in Tampa when we first moved to St. Pete. And I discovered I was looking for therapies and different avenues to try to see if we could help improve where he was at that level at that time. And I discovered that there was a program out that was being done in California, UCLA actually, by a guy named Dr. Lovas. And so I contacted them, and they said, "Hi, we can help you, but you have to hire 15 people.
Wow.
And all of you guys fly out to California, and you pay for all of this, and then we'll send your people home, and we'll give you support." And it was a 40-hour-a-week therapy session where people were working with him 40 hours a week. And I thought, well, that's ridiculous. So I talked Dr. Drash into doing it at my home, and so we got this book. This is the workbook that it was developed from, and I hired college students to come into the home. We had a weekend workshop, and then they started working with Michael, and we did that for probably it was supposed to be like a 2-year program at the time. We probably did it for 4.
You were talking to me at one point about one of the exercises that you did then, about taking the brush to brush his arm. What was that?
That was part of the occupational therapy, and one of the things that I learned from this woman, she was amazing, is that in order to acquire language, all of your senses have to be fully developed. And Michael's sense of touch had not developed properly. He couldn't feel things like we feel things. So one of the things that they did in therapy, and then I had to continue at home, I had to do it 3 times a day, and he didn't like it, but he was
Do you
little,
remember?
so
Do you remember that, Michael? Do you remember anything about your mom
about the
brushing
brush.
you?
Do you remember the brush?
What's a brush?
When I used to brush you?
I did not like it.
Well, he was little enough, he used to fight me because he didn't like it. It wasn't comfortable for him. So what I would have to do is I would have to brush his arms, his legs, his torso, and then push in his joints. It was very bizarre, I thought, but I just kept doing it because she said this would help. And actually what ended up happening over time was it ended up stimulating his sense of feeling, a physical feeling of touch. And that I believe now, looking back, I believe that that's one of the things that helped him break that barrier and be able to start speaking, because all along he was still getting speech therapy as well.
Just listening to you to say this just really, it floors me, but we don't know what we don't know as a community until there are programs in place when enough parents and educators and whatnot realize that there need to be solutions generated. And I think thankfully now we do have access to that. And we're gonna take a short break, and when we come back, Dr. Karen Berkman is going to join us with the Center for Autism and Related Disabilities from the University of South Florida, which is also all through the state. But it's so important to have resources now and the availability for parents to turn to. So when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about what are those big concerns that parents have with the two of you. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back.
Follow the Philanthropy Show on Facebook for behind-the-scenes action, polls, and commentary. The Philanthropy Show is on demand every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at both thephilanthropyshow.com and YouTube/WatchMVVP-TV.
Welcome back. This is the Philanthropy Show, and this is the Spotlight on Autism. We heard in the first segment from Linda Thyrre and her son Michael, who is a gem, about the really lack of resources that you had 23 years ago. And now, thankfully, that has changed. And I thank you, Dr. Karen Berkman, for joining us today. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Dr. Berkman is the Executive Director at the Center for Autism and Related Disabilities. We call it CARD at USF, the University of South Florida, which is actually a statewide organization.
It is true. We're one of 7 CARD centers around the state of Florida. We were the first one, and actually Linda knows very well some of the first families who got CARD started back then.
When did CARD start?
CARD started as a demonstration program actually probably maybe 24, 25 years ago, because the actual CARD centers came into being at about almost 23 years ago now, actually. Okay. But before that, it was a demonstration project that was taken to legislators through USF and those grassroots families at the beginning, you know, who were advocating around the state to, you know, find some service options for their family members.
So you heard the interview that we did with Michael and Linda, and how there was just such a limit then. Describe the difference now in what is available.
Well, I mean, not to be particularly biased, but you know, CARD is a great place to get started for families because we have a database of the options for services across the spectrum of things that families need and want.
There are different organizations that can specifically meet the different needs with children in the different ranges of the spectrum.
And not only that, but also across the age span too, because CARD serves people across the lifespan. So from doctors to therapists to recreation options and camps and all kinds of things. You know, we have information because we work with every school district in the state of Florida as well through all of the CARD centers. So we have relationships with a lot of different people, and that helps families to receive information about where to go for the things that they're going to need.
You know, and kudos to you, Linda, for being a pioneer and really researching it on your own. I think one of the things that I'm hearing that's really important is not only that parents know the resources that they have to go to, but that other nonprofits know other agencies that they could collaborate with or where to find those resources. So I'm a parent, and my child has just recently been diagnosed. What, from a parent's point of view, are your first concerns, your first oh gosh, what do I do now, I guess, feelings?
Well, when you hear something like that about your child, first of all, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. You do go through a mourning process. And I think that it's healthy to do that, because once you do that, then you can go forward and, okay, this is what I have to do now. Where do I go? What do I do? I think that today it's wonderful because there are so many more resources, and there is the internet, and a lot of people, almost everybody today uses the internet anyway, so they know that that's available to them, and I think that's wonderful. You know, back in the day when Michael was little, it was DOS.
But see, now let me ask you this, because and Karen, you can speak to this too. I would think as a human being that from a parent's point of view, there might be also a little bit of denial of not wanting to do the Google search, not wanting to find out this. Is that a true statement? I mean, is that something that parents might be like, if I reach out for help, then I'm really admitting that this might be an issue? And if that's so, how can you help somebody in that state? Anyone?
Well, I know that part of, well, my ex-husband's family was very much in denial about Michael's diagnosis, and for years it really wasn't accepted. They loved him, you know, and they, you know, treated him like family and whatnot, but they just refused to believe that he was autistic, and they used to call him Einstein. They used to say he's a little Einstein, he's not autistic. And I would get really upset because to me it was their way of being in denial, and I needed the support. As a mom, I needed the support, and I really didn't get it. I'm not on that level, I didn't get it. I got it on a lot of other levels, but I didn't get it on that level, and that was just as important as all the other levels as far as getting the therapies and the finances and all of those other things, and actually being there. I was fortunate because I wasn't working at the time, so I could spend the time looking for the therapies and researching the places and driving all over town. Like when we moved here, we lived in St. Pete, and I took Michael to Dr. Drash 3 times a week, and he was up on Gun Highway. So that was quite a drive.
And you were open to it. And I think from a professional standpoint, do you have counselors on hand to work with parents through this, through the...
Right, so I mean the experience that Linda's talking about is pretty typical, where a family will get that diagnosis, and their experience in that process in and of itself is variable depending on who the doctor is. Some doctors are great and they spend the time explaining what you need to know and what your next steps might be and giving you some resources and options. Other doctors may still be at that point where they're saying, well, he's just a boy, why don't you wait a little while longer and see what happens. Well, that's a really important window of opportunity that you may be missing out on early intervention services if you don't go ahead and pursue something. So, I think the fact is that a lot of parents know that something is going on. They might not know what it is or what it's called, but they do know that something is not right. And luckily, there are a lot of moms out there and dads that, will persist until they get an answer, even if they don't want to hear what the answer really is. But until, it's not to me so much about a label. To me, it's more about, what does Michael need, or what does this person or that person need, and then how do we best put that together.
And that makes me think that it is very important to the family as a family issue and an individual diagnosis, but it's also a community awareness issue, I think, because talking about education, where did Michael go to school?
He went through public schools.
Wow.
But he, was, I don't know what they call it now, but he was in an autism class part of the day, but the rest of the time he was mainstreamed out with an aid, into the general ed community. And
I think the general ed community, and I know you're working on a project with that through the state of trying to educate more educators and administrators on how do we incorporate, how can we be inclusive.
Right.
Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I mean, it's a difficult task for very large school districts, of course, and there are an array of classroom options now for, students with autism. I mean, from being fully included into general education through some fairly segregated settings for students who may have much more diverse needs for services to be built into that classroom and everything in between. So chances are, that families and schools can find some agreement on, the best placement for their student and the supports that they're going to need to be successful in school. And CARD does a lot of training and technical assistance with the schools to help them be able to make that happen.
I think that's really important. That's talking about the well-roundedness of the person. I'm so impressed because Michael, holding down 2 jobs, driving, he's really fully functional, and that's a part of the work environment too, where he has some folks and some coworkers that truly love him and really respect him, and that's can we talk about that as far as a community awareness? How do we work with employers? I mean, that's a vast area. Absolutely. How could you even begin to tackle that?
Well, one of the things that parents like Linda have brought to our attention over the years is how difficult it is to go and do the things that they enjoy as a family when they go into the community, because it's much more complicated sometimes. If you have a child who has sensory issues and you go into a big box store, or you go to Busch Gardens or someplace, you know, to enjoy yourself, and it's so overwhelming to that person that they're not having fun anymore, and that makes everybody else have a difficult time. You know, we were listening to those stories over and over, and we decided, you know, a lot of times, you know, we hear the focus is on the individual and changing the individual and you know, providing services and therapies and so forth, but really it's also changing from the outside in. And so what we wanted to do at CARD was to develop a way of educating businesses to be more welcoming to diverse families. And I'll just say diverse families and leave it at that. But we wanted our families to be able to go and have a good experience, whether it's buying a new car, or going to the grocery store, or going to your local, you know, recreation center or whatever. So we started a project called the Autism Friendly Business Initiative, and so we train and provide technical assistance to companies in and around our region to work with them to become autism friendly. And now we have a whole web page with about 40 businesses, including the zoo and the aquarium and all the kinds of places families
Family
like
fun
to go.
centers,
Absolutely. So that those businesses are much more educated and welcoming and know what to do in the event that a family's struggling in some way with a situation, or have some safety kits, or, you know, just tool kits available, materials that we provide, so that that family can have a really good experience in that business. And it's actually you know, we've heard from the Tradewinds Hotel and some other businesses that it's really increased their customer base and loyalty factor as well.
Oh, that's very important. I love hearing that. There's so many facets to it, and I don't think it's simply dealing with the diagnosis. I mean, Linda, I think you're a rare breed in that you're really looking at giving Michael a very well-rounded life experience, not just simply, I need to be able to raise him with this education, and but he's such a fantastic example of what can happen when you have that kind of love, dedication, and to have the resources available. I'm just wondering, you know, what does this, how is this reflected nationwide? Do we know what the statistics are for autism diagnoses, whatever the spectrum is? Do you have any idea of that?
Well, as the last CDC report came out this past year, it was 1 in 68 children are being diagnosed on the autism spectrum today. And it's higher for boys. So it's even
so it's an essential thing. It's essential that we learn, our schools really learn how to be inclusive and incorporate, and how community businesses understand this. What I love about the aspect of incorporating this into the school systems are the numbers of children who grow up with a student in their class who is diagnosed on the spectrum, and that it becomes no big deal.
Right.
That it's just another person. It's blonde hair, brown hair, autistic, not autistic. I mean, it's another and they learn then in growing into adulthood how to do that.
We were working with a 3rd grade classroom a while back with one of our board members' sons who was fully included in a regular education classroom, and this was the first time the teacher had ever had a student with autism in her class. And we interviewed the other students in the class and the teachers and the administrators, because this was such a great example of taking it on full force and trying to make something work. And the kids are so awesome, because the kids don't really you know, concern themselves with those kinds of things that we're all looking at.
The definitions.
So one little girl in the class, and I love this, she said, you know, we're all the same in different ways. And I thought, you know, that's so true, you know, for a 3rd grader to have said that. And so she didn't concern herself with the things that he couldn't do. She was there to help him try, you know, new things and help him be able to do those things.
That's really awesome.
So.
You know, and it's interesting because Michael grew up in the school system, and he has friends today that
That's great.
that he socializes with and goes out to do things with, that he's really good friends with, that he met in school. So it's so true. They grew up together. They don't see him as really any different than they are. Maybe he may need help doing this or that, or trying to understand something, but for the most part, he's just like they are. And it's great. I love that.
Kids are wonderful with that too.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you both. I think that you really have, in your different ways, in your personal ways, in your personal and professional ways, really contributed to that, exactly, that kids can actually be around other kids that have been diagnosed on the autism spectrum and just say, hey, that's Sherry, or that's Sammy, or that's, Tommy, or whatever. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We already have to take another break, but when we come back, it's time for our Truth or Care segment, and that is, specifically the personal aspect of what's important to you, and it can be community, philanthropy, your definition of that, why that's important. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more on the Philanthropy Show.
And now a word from our studio sponsor.
Tampa Bay nonprofit professionals, are you stumped by that grant application sitting on the corner of your desk? Don't worry, we can help. We have a multi-day intensive hands-on grant writing certification class that can teach you not only how to find the grants that are best suited for your program's needs, but also how to write an award-winning grant application. We hope that you'll join us for the next grant certificate program in the spring of 2015.
The Philanthropy Show is on demand every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at both thephilanthropyshow.com and YouTube/WatchMVVP TV.
Welcome back to the Philanthropy Show. Boy, these shows are so much fun and they go so fast. And this was such an important discussion with the Spotlight on Autism with Dr. Karen Berkman from CARD and Linda Thyrre. Michael Thyrre, her son, diagnosed with autism 23 years ago. Now a 26-year-old love bug. He's just wonderful. So I want to conclude today's show with the segment that we call Truth or Care. And that is, what is a personal example to you, or maybe a story or a transformative event or something that speaks to you of philanthropy, of giving, of caring, of community? Whoever wants to go first.
Well, I guess I'll go first. I think that for me personally, when my son was diagnosed, I felt that I wanted him, I didn't know what the outcome was going to be. I had no clue. But I did know that I wanted him to be a functioning member of society, and a participating member of society. I always had that in my head, so I always made it a point to put him out there, not seclude him from anything, not allow him to sit in his room, make him go out there, travel. In my job, we travel, and he's traveled, and all of these experiences, I believe, has helped him become a functioning member of society. He has not been kept in a school where he couldn't interact outside of the community, but he was put out into the community, and the community at large has accepted him. And I think that that's really, really important. I think a lot of parents are afraid to do that because they're afraid of the rejection. And yes, you do get a lot of rejection, but you can't give up. You just can't give up.
That speaks to me of whatever it is that we have as individuals, and everybody, we have something. We all want to be a part of that greater part of humanity, that community sense. And you really, of course, I can understand wanting that for your son.
Of course.
Absolutely. Karen?
Well, for me, I grew up during an era where segregation was alive and well. And when I grew up, I never saw kids with disabilities in my classes. They were in a different school, in a different place.
Wow.
And I could look across Jamaica Bay, where I grew up in New York, and I could see the building where my mom explained to me that the kids were living there. And I totally did not understand that and why that had to be that way. And I think, I've spent over the last 30 years of my career in the field of disabilities, and for me it's about leaving the community a better place than the way I found it. So my commitment, both financially and time-wise, is really to give back to the community, to be a leader in demonstrating that commitment and my values to serving people. And to making sure that we build a community that's welcoming for everybody. And that's where, I want my time and effort to be spent, and I hope that I lead my team to do the same thing.
That's great. Yeah, philanthropy is community in every essence. Two sides of the same coin. Well, thank you both.
Thank you so much for
Dr.
having me.
Berkman, thank you, Linda.
For having us.
And thank you, Michael, over there. Thank you, sir. This has been the Philanthropy Show. We will see you again next Monday. Have a wonderful evening, afternoon, or morning, depending on when you're watching this. See you next time.
Do you have an idea for the Philanthropy Show? Contact us via our website or email us at tps@myvideovoice.com.